Support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Foreign direct investment. It sounds more like a dispassionate formal requirement in an undergrad business school course than anything that may be meaningful to our everyday life and life in communities. Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy, seen for 25 years every week in every market in North and South Carolina. I am Chris William, and thank you for supporting us. The annual amount of foreign direct investment made in this country is more than anywhere on the globe by a factor of about $100 billion per annum. Last year's international firms made almost $380 billion of international investment into the U.S., and the Carolinas were at the top of that list. In fact, the Palmetto State leads this nation in per capita direct foreign investment with about 1,200 firms. And North Carolina is not too bad either. We will discuss this far-reaching implication of foreign direct investment this time on Carolina Business Review.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, J. Mark Ferris of the Greenville Area Development Corporation, Andrew Tate from the Henderson County Partnership for Economic Development, Christopher Chung of the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, and John Hunter of Womble, Carlyle, Sandridge and Rice LLP.
Hello, welcome to our program. Happy holidays to some sort. Gentlemen, welcome. Good to have a couple of you all back.
Absolutely.
And
good to be here.
I hope this is not too painful, John, for you or Andrew, but
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
We're going to launch into this. So foreign direct investment. Chris Chung, let me start with you.
Sure.
FDI, foreign direct investment in North Carolina and in South Carolina, is right at the top of the heap for this nation. Pretty important. So, you know, it sounds very clinical. It sounds very business school-like and very commercial kind of syntax. Why is this important for economic development? But really, as it permeates communities, cities, states, why is this important to understand?
Sure. Well, I'd say as clinical as the term sounds, I mean, it is something that impacts every American's daily life. When you pick up a Budweiser to drink, you are drinking the product of a foreign company that has chosen to invest in the United States. InBev, a Belgian company, acquired Anheuser-Busch probably 8 years ago now. So that's a perfect example of how foreign direct investment into the United States has an impact on our daily lives as Americans. Closer to home in North Carolina, it's really two benefits that we see. First is when companies come in from outside the U.S. and build a new factory, like a GF Linamar in Hendersonville, where Andrew is from. That's significant new job creation and new investment that's coming into a community and coming into a state from outside, and that has its own economic benefits. The other track of foreign investment is when overseas companies choose to acquire existing American firms. And that can also be very important because it's a source of capital. It's a way to sustain American companies through acquiring that outside investment. These are things that definitely have an impact on the economic well-being of the communities, not just here in North Carolina, but obviously South Carolina as well.
So thank you for that segue. So South Carolina, Mark, top of the heap for foreign direct investment. I mean, that's substantial, not because the state of South Carolina is smaller or larger than any of its southeastern cousins or national cousins, but the number one investment for foreign direct money is in South Carolina. How does the Palmetto State do that?
A lot of external marketing. You know, it's our Department of Commerce does a great job getting out, going to trade shows, getting South Carolina's name out there. But if you have iconic symbols, obviously BMW being the one in the upstate that we talked about the most. It becomes a lot easier, makes European companies more able to make that leap, and that's critically important. The U.S. market, as we travel overseas and we talk to the companies, it's all about risk, and we are still the market that limits risk, and as a result, we're still going to be, and South Carolina's done a great job with it, but we're still going to be the preferred option, especially as things get dynamic.
Andrew, Christopher also queued up for you the GFI Linamar project that is a foreign direct investment. Was that something that, excuse my lay language sometimes here, is that something you went after just because it was an economic development project, or did the FDI mantle of this have some sexiness and some marquee that Hendersonville wanted that?
Absolutely. The traditional measures, the economic impact, are certainly important. The jobs and the taxable investment are part of that. But the concept of a company that's headquartered in Guelph, Canada, and another one that's in Schaffhausen, Switzerland, choosing our community for their first home outside of those companies and for this joint venture investment, there's pride associated with that. There's also cultural implications as international companies inject themselves into our community and become part of our fabric.
John, we're down to you. Let's talk about not just the policy of it, but a little bit about current politics to some degree. So we've got a new administration, the Trump administration, been very outspoken about on protectionist type of manufacturing and in general in trade. Does foreign direct investment directly affected by some of that rhetoric?
Absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I think the grand question is going to be, how does the Trump administration deal with NAFTA as well as the Trans-Pacific Partnership agreements? And both of those agreements will significantly impact, the Carolinas and what happens with respect to how Trump goes about potentially moving American manufacturing back into the Carolinas, potentially, as well as impacting, reverse trade. The Carolinas' three biggest trading partners are Mexico, Canada, and China. All three of those are front and center, Canada and Mexico with respect to NAFTA, China with respect to trade and the potential impact of tariffs on Chinese goods. So I think it's going to be extremely interesting to see how this plays out, how the ultimately, does it mean a bump in potential manufacturing projects as well as distribution and logistical companies?
But you not to interrupt you, John, but all of you seem kind of calm about this. I mean, if we, what are you laughing about? Because some of the political rhetoric.
That's our job, to be calm.
Before
we're supposed to make it look
just
like
keep
it.
calm and economic development on. But if you listen to and I'm not trying to stir anything up, if you listen to the political rhetoric in the election season prior to when we elected a new president, I would say foreign direct investment is at the crosshairs of some of that dialogue. Do you get the sense there's some anxiety in this business because you all don't seem that?
Yeah, we're working, probably 4 dozen projects right now. Since the election, we had 2 emails from companies in Western Europe primarily say, we're rethinking our investment, we're delaying it, seeing how things shake out there. They're always amazed at the peaceful transition of power, and it's obviously not a system that they're familiar with a lot of times, so it takes them a while to get comfortable again with it. But it's pretty chaotic right now. I heard the figure driving in that 80% of Germans were concerned about Donald Trump's presidency, and that obviously reflects on the business community's potential investment. But again, I think we're still stable. We still are the place in the global economy that offers that stability, and as a result, we'll continue to see it.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think we've heard from a number of overseas companies who've expressed some concern. We may feel unstable right now internally.
Do you feel unstable?
I don't at all. And part of it is because I have a relative understanding of the instability of other areas globally. I still think the U.S. is a very secure and stable investment. There's lots of other things happening globally that encourage companies, even the Germans that are concerned, to continue to make investments in the U.S. There's certainly unstable factors in play there in Europe and across the globe as well.
Yeah.
So.
Chris?
Well, yeah, I mean, I see it as an opportunity. I know we were talking a little bit before we came on air here, but if you look at some of the leanings of Trump administration economic policy, there's a lot of buy America. There's a lot of talk of import duties weighed on companies or products coming in from outside the United States, and of course backing out of or not participating in some of these trade agreements. To me, going back on what Mark and Andrew both said, there's a certain degree of flight to quality in the United States, and with the growth patterns we've seen as a country relative to the flatness that Europe is witnessing, that Japan is witnessing, the United States is still a very attractive market for global-minded companies to come and sell into. And so if some of these barriers that are erected through trade and economic policy make it more justifiable for an overseas company to now come in and localize or domesticate their production in the U.S. market to supply the U.S. customer audience, that's certainly going to translate into opportunities for states like North and South Carolina.
So at the end of the day, will it, I hate to use that term, but it's so descriptive, does it win the day to have the stability of a market like the U.S.? Will a lot of international companies swallow some of the protectionist talk if they know they're going to have a place that's stable that they can do business?
Well, I think anyone can look past it.
I think definitely. I mean, sure, there's a high degree seemingly of protectionism and reactionism in the world right now. You know, this recent election, what happened with England and Brexit. That being said, business is business. This market is still the #1 consumer market in the world. As Chris indicated, you know, there's a number of factors, especially in the Southeast United States, which are going to be extremely attractive to foreign investment. I mean, North and South Carolina, FDI has only grown in terms of jobs that have risen over the last 5 years. I think South Carolina, 13% over the last 5 years, FDI-related employment numbers, whereas private employment overall has decreased 2.1%. So, you know, the market itself, the education system, the entrepreneurial spirit, dollar is still king. This market is still going to attract that type of investment.
And the dollar, that's a critical point, because look what's happened to the dollar, especially over the past several months.
It's been prohibitive to some degree.
And if you think about, you know, the jobs that Trump wants to create, that's going to be more difficult given the strengthening dollar. And so I think that's an issue that certainly it's a sign that there's faith and trust in the U.S. economy, but that you know, could play a role in.
So does foreign exchange rate and does the continuing momentum built around whatever a Brexit will ultimately look like, do those two things, are they going to be a wet blanket on more FDI?
I mean, if a dollar gets to the point of strength where it becomes cost prohibitive for a foreign company or overseas company to invest in and build a facility in the U.S. that's priced in American dollars, yeah, that could certainly be a headwind that foreign investment may face. Yeah, that's certainly one of those factors I imagine these companies are taking a look at when they price a location option in the U.S.
Yeah. Andrew, what do you think?
I think it's still questionable to determine what the impact of something like Brexit will be, who the winners are going to be in that equation. I certainly think the U.S. and the Carolinas specifically have an opportunity to gain there. I heard last week from a German company that you can't get an apartment in Frankfurt right now in anticipation of that being the new financial hub of Europe. So I think we're still waiting to see what the implications are. And a lot of these big decisions take time to play out.
You know, you talk about getting an apartment in Frankfurt, and you look at some of the major metros in the Carolinas, and you see a lot of cranes going up. You see a lot of concentration around apartment homes and that type of thing, which also brings up this idea of talent and the access to talent. So in the dialogue that you have with foreign direct investment companies that are even considering a move or an investment in the Carolinas, is the talent, or what we've called for years now the workers' skills gap, is that still a top 3 or top 5 issue?
It is the reason we win or lose projects. I mean,
Plain and simple?
Absolutely, especially among Western European companies who come in and they have a technology base that's critical to their success globally. And without the trained employee to operate that piece of machinery, that's not the traditional kind of manufacturing process now. 3D printing and much more sophisticated machine equipment are the rule. And without that trained employee, it's interesting, we had a German owner of a company in last month, and he says, you know, Mark, I can find somebody who can do general production. That's easy enough. And I can find in Greenville somebody to design my machine equipment. I have, you know, doctors of engineering in Greenville. What I cannot find is that technician to operate this $3 million piece of machine that's critical to my success. And so that's where we have failed to meet there's plenty of jobs. In upstate South Carolina, there's 18,000 available jobs. The disconnect is the lack of training that we've done to prepare the workforce for those jobs.
Is it become punitive for anyone? Is it punitive in your market? Is it? And you know, I got to get this right, Andrew. I'm sorry to ask you this on the air, but Hendersonville is just outside of Asheville, but is that Henderson County?
It is Henderson County.
Okay.
We sit in between Asheville, North Carolina, and Greenville, South Carolina,
Okay. Yeah.
and believe that we exhibit traits of both of those markets.
So do you have? Is it critical? Is it punitive that you don't have what Mark just described around having those technical jobs that really are keeping more people from looking at relocating?
I think it's all compared to what, where else are you competing against? These skilled employees are not sitting on the sidelines unemployed in some other community. So that quickly takes the conversation, in my opinion, to how fast can you produce those folks? Or will the skilled folks relocate to your community? Is it a desirable place to live? And so our strategy has been focused on a partnership with the North Carolina Community College System and Blue Ridge Community College specifically, and that's about a homegrown workforce with customized training. But it's also about making sure that Western North Carolina is a place that skilled folks would like to come to work for some of these companies.
And I'd say quality of life also plays a factor especially when you're talking about foreign direct investment, because oftentimes overseas companies investing in the U.S. will bring an expatriate management team from whichever country they're based in.
So not the largest percentage, but certainly the leadership team?
Typically, at least the leadership team. Oftentimes early on as they're ramping up, they may bring in additional people to train the local workforce. And so some of the questions that will come up that are unique to FDI projects is there a community? Yes, schools, cultural things that make me not as homesick for wherever it is I'm coming from, be it Japan or Germany.
Do you think North Carolina's doing a good enough job for, and don't give me a political answer, Chris, and I know you're good about this. I don't mean to be patronizing. Is North Carolina and is South Carolina doing a good enough job to backfill, to make sure that we catch up, to have those people in the pipeline to be trained, to be ready for these jobs?
I think it's an iterative process that every state is going through when it comes to economic development, and that's the reality. The needs of industry change much faster than the capacity of educational institutions to adapt to that change. The fact that they're talking much more frequently than they did when I got into this field 20 years ago, that's a right step in the right direction, because it means there's at least more synchronicity between what industry demands and what the workforce community is producing. But will they ever fully catch up? I think it's hard just based on the inherent speed of change that you see between those two different sectors.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Certainly in Greenville, we have an elementary school of engineering, so it's part of the STEM program that we have. But
Is K through 6?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, and Fisher Middle and Next High School is totally integrated in the local school system. But 3 years ago, Greenville Tech, in conjunction with Clemson University, created what's called the Center for Manufacturing Innovation. It just opened up a couple of weeks ago. Tons of private dollars are coming in. In fact, the conversation to create that entity was with Michelin and with Bosch and with GE and with BMW, because we asked them what they needed, and the CMI is the answer to that.
What's the CMI?
The Center for Manufacturing Innovation, where we're bringing students in who are not going to get 4-year degrees, but they are going to get mechatronics degrees, technical degrees to operate that machine and equipment that I was just talking about. So it's not every community is doing it, but I think both North and South Carolina acknowledge it's an issue, and almost every community is trying to address it.
You were nodding earlier like did you agree with Chris?
Absolutely.
So is there, I mean, I almost want to call this on-time education. Is anyone doing it well? And I'm not just talking about in North and South Carolina, but, and maybe Chris, since you came from Missouri, is anyone in this nation doing it really well that causes, it's like a suck for all of the talent? They're going to go there because they know they can be upfitted and up-jobbed pretty quickly, and they're going to get what they need.
Well, I mean, I'm biased. I like to think North Carolina does a pretty good job with that, but there's clearly some other states that we hear folks like John in the advisory, and John is a great person to ask that because he's counseling companies on where to look and where to locate. And so I maybe defer to you on what you see other states do that meets that workforce.
Sure, and the majority of my practice is in the Carolinas, so I'm most familiar with what the Carolinas have to offer by way of customized workforce training, community college system, and the like. But I'll say this, around the country, I still believe the Carolinas have been a model for workforce training, customization, really over the last 2 decades. And I see both of those programs continuing to elevate their game with respect to FDI recruitment and just general economic development recruitment. Yeah.
Okay. How about immigration? Tell me about that. We got about 5 minutes left, and I asked that question fairly broadly. So we've got a president or a president-elect that talked a lot about immigration policy, whether you like it or not. How does that affect the orbit of what FDI is?
I think one manifestation of a change in policy could be attitudes towards something called the EB-5 investor visa program.
You want to explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the EB-5,
briefly.
essentially, if you're an investor and you come in and you invest a certain amount of money in the U.S. in a real estate project, in a company, at a certain level, you can fast track yourself for green card citizenship. And so you're seeing a lot of dollars find their way here from markets like China, where a wealthy individual is hoping to get green card citizenship for him or herself and his or her family. And it's a good way to get capital coming in and financing deals that otherwise may have a tough time raising capital here in the U.S. But I think it's probably going to be put under some renewed scrutiny, given some of the rhetoric.
Because of the immigration rhetoric?
Yeah, simply because for some people, looking at how someone can essentially pay for play for citizenship in the United States, you can imagine for some audiences that may be somewhat questionable of a practice. And it's a law that's been on the books for probably 20 years now as a way to get capital flowing into the U.S. But I would expect that's one of those types of programs that may see some renewed scrutiny.
Did that come up in any of your dialogues with immigration when you were not just talking about the Linamar project, but in general when you're out there discussing?
Primarily, no. I think people are interested in the political components and the climate of immigration, but for the most part, these companies fully intend to establish a workforce using local assets. Chris mentioned an expat team that might come in to help start up or initially establish the structure and the production operation. But most of these companies are entirely reliant on their workforce coming from within a reasonable commuting distance of the location.
Yeah.
Chris, we've got about 3 minutes left, and I want to get to this question of tax inversion. Mm-hmm. You look pretty excited about that, are you, John? So very briefly, immigration, non-issue in South Carolina. I know it was a hot button, immigration reform. What are we going to do about that? When you overlay all of FDI and now a new administration, does it become even worse, or is it a non-issue?
No, I think there's a reasonable expectation that a nation would want to know more about its immigrants. But the reality is we're a global economy, and so I don't think we'll jeopardize our potential for commerce by adopting policies that are so restrictive that'll inhibit growth. So I think that's the bottom line.
Go ahead,
I was just going to say,
please.
immigration, my largest concern with respect to maybe immigration changes really is in the construction industry, which is fairly tight already. But, economic development projects, new plant, construction, development, general contractors, who's going to be filling a lot of those necessary positions from just a construction standpoint?
Not to put you on the spot, any idea what percentage of those first jobs?
I do not know what that is, but
It's meaningful.
it's significant, yes.
Have you heard that from your clients?
I've heard that from general contractors, who we all work with very closely.
Mm-hmm. We've got about a minute left. Tax inversions were hot for a while when you get companies that try to repatriate some of their revenue offshore because of punitive tax policy in the United States or even the region. How does that fall into FDI here? Or does it? It's kind of related, but not really, right?
It's kind of related. I would say, use the case study of the automotive industry, which is significant in South Carolina and North Carolina already as well. But think about, the big three U.S. automotive manufacturers, 7 plants down in Mexico right now, and Trump, advocating more production and manufacturing in the United States, wants to, obviously the automotive industry, I think, is going to be significantly impacted. These are companies that have made billions of dollars of investment over the last decade in Mexico. How does all this come about? Is that going to put them at a disadvantage to their foreign competitors,
right,
who stay in Mexico?
Right.
And, how does this relate to tax and inversion? I think it's all kind of plays into the same arena, but
Okay.
that's really one of my biggest
Well, And we'll have to leave it there. That's probably a separate program. But thanks for trying to wrap that up for us, John, because it wasn't easy, I know. Thank you for being on the program. Chris, good to see you again.
Always good to see you, Chris.
Always
Thank you.
Good to have you here. Mark, always good to have you.
Go
Welcome
Tigers.
back. Yeah.
Thank you.
Andrew, good to have you.
Thank you
Welcome.
very much.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for watching our program. Hope you had a good holiday and a good weekend. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.